Hello everyone and welcome back to Local Liberty. This is Brian and Shane again. We are back on January 31st, 2016. The discussion topic for this episode is going to be something that's been in the news quite a bit for the last month. It is the protest / occupation out in the middle of nowhere, Oregon. Basically, I want to...
Way to put it.
There's one particular point about this that I want to discuss, and that's going to be the difference in the mode of existence and way of life for people in the western half of the country versus the eastern half of the country, and offer that as a different perspective for people to think about when looking at this case. There's all sorts of various dimensions to this, but that's one I'm going to focus on for today.
That's something you should focus on just in general.
It's a good starting point.
For example, the country-city divide is like a major divide in values when people think about
divide?
Country-city divide. People that live in urban areas compared to people that live in the middle of nowhere, like middle of the nowhere, Oregon.
Yep.
There's differences in lifestyle.
Yeah. And that's what I want to point out to folks that may not be aware of how different things are out there and why. So first, to start off, the reasons for this protest. An occupation, which I think the occupation is still going on, about a month into it.
4 people left?
Right.
Maybe.
Some very small number of they took over a federal building on federal wildlands, basically a
wildlife refuge, maybe?
Wildlife refuge, yes.
But it was the building that
they took over the building within a wildlife refuge. The main reasons that sparked this is there's been a ranching family, the Hammond family, that has, I'll say, just to put it in my view, has been completely railroaded for the last 5 or 6 years. And their family's been harassed like a whole lot of other families by the federal government for decades. And these guys are going to jail. They're in jail right now, charged with terrorism for lighting fires to protect their own property from wildfires. You light like a backfire to sort of burn out an area so the fire doesn't come and consume your whole house and barn and land. And lighting fires and wildfires, that's just a thing that happens out there. And like an acre out of a gazillion acres of state land was burnt. And
this is actually something it's a known practice to stop fire.
Yes.
Because there's a bunch of dead vegetation. You burn strategically that, and now there's a
dead
gap
zone that the fire can't cross.
Right. So this is actually a known method of controlling fires that the parks use, like the Yellowstone. These groups use them. This is not just, oh my God, they're crazy.
Right. So basically, this all went down like 5 years ago, and these guys got arrested and charged with terrorism for burning an acre of forest, no damage to any people, anybody's personal property.
It was their property, wasn't it?
A lot of it was on their property, but it just spilled over the border somewhere, and they got convicted of 5 years in prison. And the judge at the time said, "This is ridiculous. I'm not sending you guys to prison for this long." And the father and son each served a couple months, or one served a month and one served like 9 months, and they got released. But some asshole federal prosecutor or somebody got got vindictive and dragged them back into court and said no, the judge was not allowed to let them off with leniency, and now they got thrown back in prison for serving the rest of their 5-year term. And the father is like 79 or something. So the treatment of the Hammond family is that was the initial
I didn't know that's. It took me a moment to sink that in. So they were sentenced to some light sentence, and then some other government official came in after the fact and resentenced them from back.
Yeah. It's
technically that might not be double jeopardy. I understand that technically,
but they weren't convicted of the crime again. They were like their sentence was suspended back then. It was unsuspended.
I understand that, but the whole concept behind that is like, no, you're off, and now you can't be harassed anymore.
Right. So like I said, they got railroaded.
Wow.
And that was the main reason why the protesters went out there, led by the Bundy family, who was the family from Nevada a few years ago that made big headlines for much of the same reasons, which is the second reason for this for the overall protest is the Bureau of Land Management, the federal agency out there, what they do to the lifestyle, to the people, to the land, to everything. Basically, the Bundys, the two of them and their supporters, I'll give these guys a lot of credit for walking the walk instead of talking the talk in the sense of standing up for their neighbors who were being abused. Now, their neighbors happened to be 1,500 miles away, but it was a kindred spirit. It was someone they had a bond with and a common culture, like we just talked about in a recent episode. So these guys said, I'm going to stand up for them. I think it's wrong what's being done to them, to the Hammonds, and I think it's wrong the fact that the BLM is destroying ranchers' lives out west. So those are the two.
What was the BLM again?
Bureau of Land Management.
All right.
So those are the two main reasons for why this whole thing got started. There are a couple reasons why this didn't get a lot of this didn't get a lot of widespread support. It didn't get a lot of popular attention. It's not like what happened out in Nevada, where hundreds of people showed up. There was a huge public outcry because this case is a lot more confused. A lot of people don't even know, like I just said. You just learned how these Hammond family guys are getting railroaded in court.
Yeah.
And the fact is they chose to occupy property, a building on federal land, and a lot of folks, and this is the whole point of this episode, they don't understand what this whole concept of federal land means out there. So, and maybe the most damning reason why they did get a lot of popular support is the Hammond family themselves, publicly anyway, distanced themselves from this whole protest and apparently made public statements saying we don't want these guys out here, we don't want this protest, and they still went out there anyway. So that was one of the reasons why it didn't take off, and that's when a lot of the criticism is coming from. But then I want to relate this into a recent trip I took for work. That was really eye-opening for me because I was out west for a few days for work in very rural Arizona, Utah, and Nevada. I flew in to Nevada, to Las Vegas, and I had to drive into rural northern Arizona, which means I had to go up into Utah and back down into Arizona. I don't know if you recall any of the images, if you followed that thing out in the Bunkerville, Nevada, was the Bundy Ranch thing where they had the highway overpass, where they had the standoff. I'm pretty sure I drove over that. That was Highway 15. I drove right over that overpass on my way out to Arizona. And I just wanted to relate, what I saw, what I learned out there, and hopefully give people a little different perspective on the background of this whole Oregon protest and just life in the Midwest through my very, very brief trip. It was a 3-day trip out there. It was, as you'd expect, absolutely gorgeous, beautiful country. Wide open. The mesas and canyons, and you could see 30 miles in either direction. I was up in the high desert. There was snow. There was more snow out there than there was in Connecticut. And at one point, I drove through a forest, the Kaibab Forest, went up to 8,000 feet, and there was 2 feet of snow and these ponderosa pines and I think Douglas firs maybe everywhere. It looked like Vermont. All of a sudden, you climb up out of the desert in the scrub forest, and you're in this beautiful, really cold, deep snow, just dense pine forest. Totally unexpected. I wasn't expecting that. But the defining feature of practically everywhere I drove through was it was empty. It was devoid of human activity, except for the guy that got the contract to put in fencing along the highway, like 5,000 miles of fencing. That's all you saw. And this was the public lands where at one point people could graze cattle on them.
Well, what was the fencing for?
To keep the cattle off the road. It was barbed wire fencing with just regular metal T-posts pounded into the ground. 10,000 miles of it. So this is area, and there were still a few cows. I don't know if it was a seasonal thing, there's less cows or whatever, but there would be some cows that were 10, 20 miles away from any other cow that I could see along the road anyway. And so there was very sparsely populated with the cattle. But that was a defining feature out there. It was empty. And that is what I want to say is it's an unnatural emptiness. Because, like, if you drive around Connecticut, and eastern Connecticut, we've got some beautiful farms, and what are some of the most beautiful spots that you're going to see? It's going to be where somebody's cleared a view. Somebody's made a farm, pasture, big cropland. You see some fencing. You see a nice barn, rolling hills, animals here and there. where there's no activity, you just see forest. And you know, I love forests. I love being in the woods. Forests are wonderful, but so are open vistas. And the federal government did not create the open views out there. They were already there. What the federal government is doing is creating the extremely unnatural environment where there is this massive hundreds and thousands of square miles of land that they've just walled off and said, you can't use it. We're claiming it. It's gone from unclaimed to it's ours now, you can't use it. And maybe we'll let you graze a few cows on it, but you can't build a house on it, you can't build a business, you can't live on it. We're going to dictate in very narrow terms how you're going to use it. So that's where I was in extremely rural, remote areas of Utah, Nevada, Arizona. That's how I was. That was a dominant feature of the land. Is it was empty. It was devoid of human activity. And in my eyes, in my view, it would have been even more beautiful if I saw farms dotted along there. Maybe even occasional business here and there. I love to see human achievement. I love to see people investing. I love to see people building capital. That is a beautiful thing to my eyes. The natural beauty is also wonderful. So, with that said, I want to just talk about a few numbers that I just put together with some quick Googling. Some statistics on federal land ownership. 27.4% of the entire country, so more than 1/4 of the entire country, 623 million acres is owned by the federal government. And a massive amount of that is up in Alaska. But they own, you can still say for the western continental United States, they own almost half of it. In that area, this is just a random statistic I put together, that's over half the size of the European Union is owned by the federal government. And some specific state-by-state highlights. Interesting to note, Connecticut, 0.3% is the lowest. We are the lowest state of 50 out of 50 for the amount of land that the federal government owns. Oregon, 53%, where these protests were. Nevada, where the last round of this, with the Bundy Ranch stuff, 85% of Nevada is owned by the federal government. Arizona, where I was, and which is mostly in the north, 38% of it is owned by the federal government, mostly in the northern parts where I was traveling through. Idaho, 61%. Idaho is the culture over there, and the population is similar to Oregon, and where the area where all this protests have been happening. Utah, 65%. Washington, 28.5%. So those are just a sample of some of the states out there where there's massive amounts of federal ownership. And then to throw that in as another perspective, with Connecticut at 0.3%, 7.9% of Connecticut is owned by the state of Connecticut. And I was actually surprised it was that high. But then it's think about out here, our area, there's some massive state forests like Natchog, Patchogue, whatever the one is out in Voluntown, Griswold area. So
well, we're in the last Green Valley, so there's a lot of
and we accumulate some serious acreage from the state out there. But I think that number even may include like the state land that they own for the highways. I don't know. But either way, I was kind of surprised it was 8%. I thought that I was expecting it to be a little bit lower. But regardless, compare 8% to 53%. Now, I didn't have a chance to look up how much the state of Oregon owns in Nevada, but I'm sure maybe it's 8% again. Maybe it's a good percentage points. Compare that difference to, over half of the state is owned by the federal government. Over half of the state is ran by people on the other side of the country in Washington, D.C. And I want to try to get people to think about what that means, about how different that mode of existence could be, where it'd be, just think of like every other house in Willimantic owned by Washington, D.C. And they did whatever the hell they wanted with it, whenever they wanted, and dictated the terms to you. That would... you could say it's ripe for potential aggravation at the very least, right? And that is a perspective that I don't think a lot of people in our culture out here, in this geography, understand what it's like to have an absentee landlord that can do whatever the hell they want. And the bonus, and this is why a lot of the stuff flared up with the Bundy Ranch stuff a few years ago, going back decades, the Bundy family and other families out there determined that they were being forced to fund the operation that was trying to destroy their way of life. In other words, they had to They were being forced to pay money into the Bureau of Land Management, and the Bureau of Land Management was doing everything they could to make their lives as difficult and unproductive as possible to prevent them from running their family business, which was grazing cattle on the unclaimed resources out in the desert, which they improved.
This must, regardless of these people's worldview, way of life, or thinking, just think about it in the abstract. I was just thinking about this. You're a very small group of people, and you have your way of life. You're an insulated community, and your area, the surrounding areas where you live, is all being decided by bureaucrats far, far away, who are influenced by the country as a whole. An urban country, where we live, a country that doesn't understand their lifestyle, and they're making rules based on those people and not the people that actually have to live there. And we're not even getting into what you think about how the land should be used. None of that. We're not getting that point. We're just thinking about sympathize with those people just a little bit. About, man, that's gotta be a shitty situation.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly, the details of the situation. And maybe, but that's very bizarre. It's an extreme example of distant rule. Right? Because usually with, like here in Connecticut, we talk about federal government. Well, they decide laws and whatnot, but we're, more in line with the general country's viewpoints. These very isolated communities, though, it must be really hard for them. Because they have no power. They have no say.
Yeah, that's the beautifully horrendous nature of democracy and majority rule of, 8 million people in New York City cast their vote one way, so now your life changes in Oregon. That's insane. That is not a sane way to structure a culture. That is a way to structure a culture that is guaranteed to result in conflict over time, which is what we are seeing now. So I hope that gives you guys a little bit more information. I may have a link or two to post. I will actually post. There's a good link that sort of chronicled the whole story of what the Hammonds have been subjected to. I'm going to post that link on the YouTube post for this video. And this story isn't over yet. There's, like I said, there's still 4 people out there.
But the story's not. I don't think it's so important, because I don't know if these people really are in the right mindset to do this. Especially, I didn't realize that the people that they're protesting for said don't do it. So I don't really want to focus on these people, because I have no idea what their beliefs are. Yeah. Just the idea. I'm just thinking about it. Some of these ranchers, some of these people have lived here for generations and generations. There's not that many people like me that do this.
Yeah.
And they're dominated by a much larger group.
Yep.
And we're not even get to if they're right or wrong, who's right or wrong. You can think about those people on the ground, what it's like for them, and maybe just have some understanding. Even if you eventually go, yeah, well, they did something stupid, they shouldn't have done that. Even if you do draw that, you eventually reach that conclusion. Just think about it that way. I always talk about on the show, just a little bit of compassion, a little bit of thinking about things before just coming to your conclusion. That'd be helpful. It's like that judge, who tried. I know there's a law that says this, but I'm going to make it easier on you. And then, of course, if the prosecutor came or whatever and screwed him over, a little bit of that is better. So even if these guys screwed up, like say, but we determined that it was just a bad idea, it just didn't make any sense, they were in the wrong. When we get to, like, say, arresting them, sentencing them, keep these conditions in mind. Keep that in mind.
All right. That is a good place to end. Thank you, Shane. Check us out on YouTube and Facebook at Local Liberty and localliberty.org.
Click that like button.
And if you have any interest in any particular topics that you would like us to discuss, please let us know. And I am always, both of us are looking for locally relevant issues that relate to the ideas of liberty. Thanks for listening, guys, and take care.